Let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're going to completely dissect a masterfully crafted suspense thriller called The Girl in Cabin 14. We're going to look really closely at the anatomy of misdirection. You know how a perfectly constructed narrative can take our darkest expectations, play into literally all of our assumed horror tropes, and then just completely pull the rug out from under us. So I want you to imagine this for a second. What would you do if you found yourself trapped in a desolate, middle-of-nowhere motel with a killer? It's a terrifying premise, right? Well, to really understand how this story hooks us so effectively, we first have to put ourselves directly into the protagonist's shoes on a really dark, stormy night, right at the exact moment when everything starts going wrong. And this setup brilliantly illustrates how the narrative traps us from the very beginning. We meet our guy, Daniel Mercer, and the author establishes that classic horror trope of the isolated setting just perfectly. I mean, his GPS died 30 miles back. His phone is clinging to a 2% battery. He's driving down this stormy, pitch-black highway until he finally pulls into the grim, dust-smelling Graywood Motel. The isolation is absolutely complete. The trap is set. Then comes the very first major red flag. Daniel walks into the lobby and meets the receptionist. And this guy is a pale, unblinking man who just moves a little too slowly, you know? Behind the desk, all the room keys are neatly hung up, except for the conspicuously missing key for cabin 14. But when Daniel asks if there are many guests staying there tonight, the manager just smiles and says, "Just you."
Now, notice this really subtle visual clue planted right at the beginning. As lightning flashes outside, Daniel sees, just for a split second, a girl standing behind the receptionist. She's got wet hair and a white dress, and then she's just gone in the darkness. It's this incredibly early introduction of a supernatural element. It's a tiny seed planted in our minds that we are absolutely going to need to remember later.
So watch how the narrative masterfully lures Daniel out of the relative safety of his locked room, which is cabin 12, by using sound. First, he hears this faint crying coming through the wall. Then, 3 slow knocks coming from the supposedly empty cabin 14 right next door. And finally, the visual hook. There's a dim yellow light glowing from behind cabin 14's curtains, and Daniel, being driven by basic human curiosity and concern, steps out into the freezing rain to investigate. Inside cabin 14, Daniel finds scattered women's clothes and some warm food, but there's no person. Then, the bathroom door creaks open. Still no one there, but written on the fogged-up mirror is this chilling warning: don't trust the manager. And the visceral tension just spikes right here. Because right as Daniel is reading this, a loud thud draws his attention to the window. Standing in the freezing rain outside, just staring unblinking at the cabin, is the manager. Suddenly, the lights die. Out of the darkness, a young woman's voice whispers for help. Daniel shines his flashlight and finally meets Claire. She is curled up in a corner, super pale with these terrified eyes. She whispers to him, "He'll kill me if he sees you." And by introducing Claire as this quintessential helpless victim, the story firmly cements our bias against the manager. At this point, we are fully convinced the manager is the monster. And the pacing right here just accelerates into a rapid escalation of danger. The manager comes to the door, calmly asking Daniel to return to his room, and starts banging on the locked door. Claire then reveals that 3 girls have already disappeared from this place. Then, looking out the window, Daniel literally sees the manager dragging a human-sized plastic-wrapped shape into the trunk of a car. So Daniel and Claire make a desperate attempt to flee into the storm. But their escape route is already cut off. They make it to Daniel's car only to find that all 4 tires have been completely slashed. And right behind them, a flashlight beam cuts through the rain. The manager is standing 20 yards away, smiling, and he's holding an axe. He softly tells Daniel, "You should have stayed in your room." The whole cat and mouse chase sequence through the muddy woods begins right here, dramatically raising the stakes and our adrenaline. Running for their lives, Claire points out this old shed hidden in the woods. They barricade themselves inside, but when Daniel sweeps his flashlight across the floor, he realizes pretty quickly that this isn't just a shed. It's a trophy room. There are dozens of photos of sleeping girls pinned up, including a photo of Claire dated just yesterday. And this perfectly validates all of our earlier assumptions, right? The manager is unequivocally a serial killer. But the horrors inside this shed don't stop at the photos. Daniel discovers a heavily chained trapdoor on the floor. He manages to rip the chains free, only to find 3 women trapped alive underground. This shocking discovery elevates the manager's apparent crimes from simple murder to something prolonged, torturous, and just deeply, deeply sinister. The tension is at its absolute peak right now. Suddenly, the manager violently breaches the shed door, dragging his axe behind him. He lunges, Daniel swings a shovel, and he actually strikes the manager right in the head. We fully expect this to be the moment the hero saves the day. The nightmare's over, right? Well, let me ask you this. What if the killer isn't the one holding the axe? We are primed right here for a massive narrative collision. The bleeding manager stumbles backward, but he starts laughing. He points a shaky finger at Claire and says, "You have no idea what she is. She came here first." And with that single insane line of dialogue, the entire narrative flips completely upside down. The apex predator in this story isn't the man with the axe. So, how does this double twist work so flawlessly? It relies entirely on our own built-in assumptions. We just naturally assumed the manager was the serial killer and Claire was the helpless victim. But the actual reality? The manager was a desperate jailer trying to contain a monster, and Claire is a supernatural predator. The author masterfully weaponized classic horror tropes to entirely blindside us, forcing us to project our own expectations right onto the characters. The horrifying reality of Daniel's mistake really sets in when the three trapped girls below start screaming. But they aren't screaming at the manager. They are screaming at Daniel. They're yelling, "Don't let her out." The sheer terror of these human captives realizing that the true monster has just been set free by the very person who thought he was saving them is absolutely chilling. We then get to witness the terrifying physical and psychological transformation of Claire. Her whole facade of the victim just drops instantly. The fake fear vanishes, replaced by this dead, cold silence. As the shed goes dark, we hear these wet, tearing sounds. And when the light returns, the manager is dead and Claire's bones are cracking unnaturally as she slowly turns to Daniel. Her eyes have turned completely, solidly black. Covered in the manager's blood, she looks at the man who just fought so hard to save her life and delivers the story's most chilling line. She says, "You were kind to me, but I'm still hungry." Daniel is forced to flee blindly back into the endless, stormy woods, listening to this inhuman thing crawling through the trees impossibly fast right behind him. Miraculously, Daniel actually reaches the highway and flags down a passing truck. But the aftermath is where the bizarre, supernatural reality of the event is totally cemented. When police arrive 30 minutes later, the Graywood Motel isn't just abandoned. It's gone. Literally gone. Only burned ruins remain. There are no bodies, there are no cabins, and there is absolutely no sign of Claire. And here is the tragic irony of our protagonist's journey. 5. That is the number of murders Daniel is officially blamed for. Why? Because he grabbed the manager's axe in the shed, his fingerprints were all over the murder weapon, and his clothes were absolutely covered in blood. The real-world justice system found a perfect, logical suspect for an entirely illogical crime. So Daniel ends up spending 8 agonizing years in prison. For 8 years, he claims this impossible story of a vanished motel and a literal monster named Claire. And for 8 years, absolutely nobody believes him. He becomes another victim of Claire's, just in a completely different psychological way. Now knowing the ending, let's look back at the brilliant foreshadowing planted early on, the missed clues that we all completely glossed over. The manager constantly telling Daniel to stay in his room wasn't a threat at all. It was a desperate warning. That ghostly girl in the lightning flash, that was Claire, out hunting. And the jammed cell signal, the manager was actively trying to contain her to the motel grounds so she couldn't spread. That sinister-seeming manager was actually trying to protect Daniel the whole entire time. Which brings us to the present day in the story's timeline. The horror narrative transforms into this enduring, modern urban legend. After 8 years of nobody believing Daniel, a new report comes in. 3 states away, a brand new cycle is beginning at a totally different motel in a new cabin 14. The cycle continues, perfectly mirroring the exact start of our story. A motel receptionist reports a strange girl checking in for the night. She has wet hair, a white dress, black eyes, and she's smiling. The supernatural predator is still out there. She's hungry, and she is setting her trap all over again for the next weary traveler who thinks they are just stopping for the night. And that brings us to the end of our explainer. This story forces us to look at our own blind spots, brilliantly using our own natural desire to be the hero right against us. So I'll leave you with this lingering thought to ponder. In a world built on misdirection, who is the monster you are unknowingly trying to save? Thanks for joining me on this deep dive, and keep questioning what you see.